Black billionaire woman is targeted and arrested by an abusive cop, simply because she is present, and the officer has no idea that his callous actions will soon trigger a chain of events that reveal hidden truths. What will happen when the world finally learns who she really is, and the extent of the injustices she has endured? Subscribe to the channel and follow along as this powerful story unfolds, and please let me know in the comments where you are watching from. That particular afternoon, gentle sunlight bathed the bustling city streets in a warm glow. Amid the noise and activity, Vivian Sinclair, the Black billionaire woman, had chosen a quiet corner to reflect. Dressed in simple clothing that made her appear entirely ordinary, she deliberately embraced anonymity. Vivian's remarkable journey from the hard, unforgiving days of a rough neighborhood to becoming one of the world's most influential business leaders was filled with trials and triumphs. Moments like these, sitting quietly away from the chaos, brought her a rare sense of peace amid life's relentless pace. Yet her brief respite was about to be shattered. Heavy footsteps echoed from the end of an otherwise empty street, their sound bouncing off the brick pavement. Vivian looked up, sensing a sudden chill in the air. A police officer was approaching, his gaze cold and his face marred by undisguised contempt. This was Officer Walker, a name notorious in the community, whispered about because of his harsh demeanor and uncontrolled behavior. "Do you think you can just sit here?" Walker barked in a rude, mocking tone. Vivian met his gaze steadily, although a tension rose within her. She said nothing, her eyes remaining calm even as a sharp alertness stirred in her gut. Yet Walker pressed on, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is a decent neighborhood, not a place for people like you," he sneered while scrutinizing her as though she were an unwelcome intruder. At his words, Vivian's hands clenched beneath her coat. Anger surged in her chest, but she forced herself to remain composed. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she said in a steady, clear voice. "I'm simply sitting here for a moment." Walker's sneer deepened, and he retorted coldly, "You don't understand how things work here, do you? I decide what is right or wrong, and you, sitting here looking like that, are wrong." The tension in Vivian's heart was palpable, but she stood her ground. She understood that while she had to be cautious not to escalate the situation, she also could not allow herself to be pushed back by a hateful stereotype. Confronting an abusive officer like Walker was never simple, yet she held her back straight and met his threatening stare. "You have no right to tell me I can't sit here," she declared firmly. Walker's eyes flared with anger and his mouth tightened. "You think you're smart, huh? Maybe I should teach you a lesson about respecting the law." His voice was low and menacing, and he stepped closer, his gaze full of challenge. Vivian's heart began to beat fast in her chest, but she did not waver. She had faced many daunting challenges in her life, none, however, as direct as this public threat on the street. Walker took yet another step, close enough that she could see the scorn in his eyes, and she realized that her next move must be cautious. "Stand up," Walker ordered, his voice commanding as his right hand brushed lightly against his gun belt in a silent, ominous warning. His eyes swept over the empty street as if searching for a witness to justify his oppressive behavior, yet there was no one there. The silence of the street only intensified the suffocating atmosphere. "I'm not breaking any law," Vivian replied, her voice calm but firm. She did not rise, not out of defiance, but because she knew that she had the same rights as anyone else. Although anger simmered within her, she forced herself to remain controlled, aware that any sign of fear or loss of composure might only encourage Walker further. Walker smirked and leaned down closer. "Who do you think you are? Do you think you're special, when anyone could be dragged to the station if need be?" His words were laced with contempt. Vivian said nothing, instead holding his gaze with unwavering confidence and resolve. Her silence only seemed to fuel his anger. In an instant his face contorted as he raised his hand and shoved her shoulder. Vivian stumbled briefly, but she quickly regained her balance. The feeling of disrespect surged within her, and her eyes glittered with anger. Though fear crept in, she refused to back down. Walker's gaze remained cold, and Vivian knew that the situation could worsen, yet she had no intention of being intimidated. Emphasizing each word with a low, clear voice, she said, "You have no right to do that." In a sudden movement, Walker forcefully grabbed her arm and yanked her upward. "Do you think there's anyone here to protect you?" he growled, his voice low and threatening. "Let me show you. I am the law. Vivian felt a sharp pang of pain as his grip tightened and her heart pounded fiercely, but still her gaze remained fixed. She could not and would not back down. Just then, a voice cut through the tense air, a voice both sharp and full of authority. "Take your hands off her, now!" Startled, Walker turned around. His eyes flashed with anger and surprise as he saw Daniel Reed approaching. For a moment, Walker's gaze flickered, then quickly returned to its cold, challenging demeanor. "Who are you? This isn't your business. Move along," he snapped. Daniel took another step forward, undeterred by the implied threat in Walker's tone. "I witnessed everything," he said calmly, his voice firm yet measured. His eyes met Vivian's, conveying empathy and determination, as if assuring her that she would not have to face this injustice alone. Walker sneered and tried to smooth over the situation with a forced smile of challenge. "It's just a misunderstanding, sir, but I'd advise you not to interfere with police matters if you don't want trouble." Even as he maintained his grip on her arm, his posture betrayed his tension. Daniel, undeterred, continued to stare him down. "I'm willing to face any trouble if it means defending her rights," he stated firmly. "And if you think that this abuse of power will go unchallenged, then you are mistaken." At that, Walker's grip loosened slightly, though the atmosphere remained charged. For the first time during the encounter, Vivian felt relief, a deep sense of gratitude mixed with the knowledge that she was no longer alone. "I'll remember this," Walker muttered through gritted teeth, his eyes flashing with restrained anger as he released her and backed off. His parting words, laced with a grim warning, were, "Don't think this is over. You should be careful. There isn't always someone here to protect you." Daniel quickly moved in front of Vivian, his stance unmistakably protective. "We'll see who needs to be careful, Officer Walker," he said. In the ensuing silence, Walker retreated with heavy, deliberate steps toward his patrol car, throwing one last cold glance over his shoulder before leaving. Vivian exhaled slowly, feeling the tension gradually dissipate. She turned toward Daniel, her eyes soft with gratitude yet still determined. "Thank you, Daniel," she said softly but with sincerity. Daniel nodded, his gaze warm despite the lingering resolve in his expression. "I couldn't just stand by and watch that happen," he said. For a moment, Vivian stood in silence, still feeling the tremors of the encounter. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a silent promise that she was not alone in this fight. But the temporary relief was short-lived. Almost immediately, another patrol car pulled up, and red and blue lights flashed, illuminating the stern faces of two officers who stepped out with firm strides and no trace of sympathy. "We need you to come with us," one officer said in a steady, emotionless tone. Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but Vivian gently shook her head. Her eyes remained fixed, determined. She knew she had to face what was coming next, and that she must keep calm to prepare for what lay ahead. "Don't worry, Daniel," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll be fine." Daniel's eyes, a mix of worry and determination, met hers as he replied, "I'm contacting a lawyer right away. Do not let them do anything without a lawyer present." Vivian offered a small, reassuring smile. "I know," she said. With that, Vivian was escorted into the patrol car. The cold metal of the seat pressed against her, a stark reminder of the harsh reality that awaited her. Through the car's windows, streetlights flashed, reflecting in her eyes which held no fear, only a deep, unyielding determination. As the car rolled toward the police station, the familiar cityscape outside, with its towering buildings and winding roads, suddenly seemed alien and unwelcoming. When the car came to a stop, the slam of its door echoed in the heavy silence, and Vivian was led inside. The interior of the station was cold and drab. Harsh fluorescent lights shone down from the ceiling, creating an uninviting, stark atmosphere. The sharp scent of disinfectant filled the air, wrinkling her nose. Although she could hear distant sounds of laughter, the clatter of keyboards, and the steady footsteps of officers beyond the interrogation room, inside everything was eerily silent. Vivian sat on a hard metal chair, feeling the cold seep through her clothing. Her hands rested lightly on the table, and she trembled slightly from the adrenaline still pulsing through her veins. Taking a deep breath, she fought against the rising urge to succumb to anger or fear. Memories of the hard days of her youth, when she had overcome obstacle after obstacle to prove herself, both to society and to herself, rose in her mind. Those painful memories now served as a well of strength, helping her to face the current situation with unwavering resolve. Suddenly, the door to the interrogation room swung open, and Walker re-entered with a cold smile that sent shivers down her spine. He paused for a moment before slowly stepping toward her, his gaze full of challenge. "Do you think that having someone stand up for you changes anything?" he asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a finely honed blade. Vivian looked up, her eyes meeting his hateful stare. Although her heart was still racing, she managed to keep her voice steady. "I don't think I've won," she replied, each word carefully enunciated, "but I know this is only the beginning." Walker frowned, and his twisted smile faded. The space between them grew thick with tension as they stared each other down, neither willing to back down. Finally, with eyes flashing repressed anger, Walker stepped back. "You'll soon see who really has power," he said, then turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him. Vivian sat in silence, listening to his footsteps fade away. When the silence returned, it was different now, no longer filled with helplessness, but with a burning determination. She knew that this fight would be long, but she was ready to face it all for justice, not only for herself but also for those who had no voice. The steady ticking of the clock on the wall echoed in the quiet, each second stretching out as Walker's threats continued to echo like an incessant, unyielding sound. Rather than succumbing to fear, Vivian felt a burning fire ignite within her, a reminder that she had faced adversity before and emerged stronger each time. At that moment, the door opened once again, and Vivian turned to see Sandra Mills enter the room. Sandra's presence was commanding, her eyes sharp and confident. Daniel followed close behind, his face tense yet resolute. As warm light spilled in from the hallway, it brought with it a hint of hope. "Vivian," Sandra called, her voice steady and powerful. She pulled a chair across from Vivian and set her black briefcase on the table before opening it with deliberate purpose. Daniel sat beside Vivian, his eyes filled with concern and conviction. "I spoke with Sandra on the way here," he said softly, "and she is one of the best lawyers I know. We are not going to let this go easily." Sandra fixed her determined gaze on Vivian. "We will expose Walker and anyone involved," she declared firmly. "But first, I need you to tell me everything, from start to finish, without leaving out a single detail." Vivian took a deep breath, suppressing the rush of mixed emotions inside her, and began recounting every moment. From sitting on the shop steps and hearing heavy footsteps, to how Walker had approached her with arrogance and intimidation. Every word was laced with anger and the deep pain of oppression. Sandra listened intently, scribbling notes so that no detail was missed. As Vivian described how Walker had shoved her and taken her to the station under duress, Sandra's eyes sharpened even further. Daniel sat quietly beside them, clenching his fists as he absorbed each detail of the injustice Vivian had suffered. "Walker has a history of abusing his power," Sandra said, her voice rising with tension. "I've heard about his behavior crossing the line, but no one has ever seriously challenged him. Until now." Vivian's voice, though tinged with fatigue, grew steadier as she asked, "What's our next move?" Sandra closed her notebook, her gaze unwavering. "First, we file a lawsuit against Walker and the police chief," she said. "We demand a full investigation into his actions. This case is not just about individual misconduct. It is about a systemic issue that must be addressed." Daniel's eyes shone with resolve as he added, "They will not accept this easily. They will try to fight back, smear your name and weaken the case." Vivian paused for a moment, then looked up with eyes burning with determination. "I have faced scorn and oppression my entire life," she declared. "They can try to bring me down, but I will not back down. This fight is not just for me. It is for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly and silenced." Sandra offered a rare, encouraging smile. "Then let's start now. I will contact the press and make this case public. They will soon learn that Walker has messed with the wrong person." A heavy silence fell over the room, a silence filled not with loneliness or tension, but with the readiness for battle. A battle not only to protect Vivian, but also to send a powerful message that justice will be sought. News of Vivian's lawsuit spread like wildfire, capturing national attention. Major newspapers, from esteemed print outlets to social media channels, reported on the Black Billionaire standing up against a notoriously abusive cop. Headlines like "Billionaire challenges the system" and "Vivian Sinclair leads the fight against abuse of power" dominated the news. Later, in her office, Vivian gazed out the window as sunlight illuminated the lively city below. Yet a heavy feeling weighed on her heart. She knew the real battle was only beginning. Suddenly, her phone rang, breaking the quiet. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. When she answered, his voice, mixed with concern and anxiety, warned, "Vivian, have you read the comments? We're getting overwhelming support, but there is also plenty of criticism." Vivian replied calmly, though a hint of fatigue crept into her tone. "Yes, Daniel, I have seen them." Her eyes scanned the screen as comments poured in. Some praised her courage, calling her a pioneer in the fight against injustice, while others questioned her motives, accusing her of exploiting the incident to build her image or protect her interests. "These criticisms are only the beginning," Daniel said quietly. "They will dig into your past and try every tactic to discredit you. But remember, you are not alone. Sandra is ready to counter every attack." For a moment, Vivian was silent, her gaze drifting to the stream of cars passing by as she recalled her childhood, when as a little girl she had fought hard just to be recognized in a poor neighborhood, even as those around her dismissed her dreams. Those painful memories, though difficult, had become a source of strength. "I know, Daniel," she said firmly. "I have prepared myself for this." Just then, a knock sounded at the door, and Sandra entered carrying a thick file. Her face was focused and determined. "Vivian, we need to talk," she said resolutely. "Today's press conference is crucial. It is our chance to tell your story from your perspective and to assert why we are fighting." Vivian nodded, her eyes reflecting both tension and a glimmer of resolve. "I understand, Sandra. I know we must deliver a strong, clear message," Sandra continued. "But you need to be prepared for all kinds of questions, even the difficult ones. They will try to unsettle you and question your motives." Daniel sat close by, his eyes filled with unwavering support. "You are not doing this alone," he said. "The whole team is here with you." Vivian exhaled deeply, feeling the weight on her shoulders but also the strength of the support surrounding her. That afternoon, the press conference marked the first public step in clarifying the truth. The press room was packed. Camera flashes blinked incessantly, and the murmur of hundreds of voices created an atmosphere thick with suspense. Vivian stepped onto the podium, her heart racing, but her gaze remained steady. Sandra stood in a corner, holding a stack of documents and ready to step in if necessary. "Thank you all for being here today," Vivian began, her voice resonant and clear. As the murmurs subsided, every eye was on her. "I stand before you not just for myself, but for all those who have been treated unjustly and silenced. Abuse of power cannot continue, and we must enact change." Questions soon erupted, from supportive ones to those laced with subtle accusation. An elderly journalist stood up and asked, "Miss Sinclair, do you believe what you are doing is truly for justice, or is it simply a way to bolster your image?" Vivian met his gaze without flinching. "I do not need to bolster my image," she replied firmly. "I achieved everything I have through relentless hard work. Today's actions are not for fame or money. They are for upholding human dignity and ending abuse, not only for myself but for everyone who has been overlooked." As her words settled over the room, the atmosphere shifted. Every eye was fixed on her, not just as a billionaire but as a symbol of resilience and courage. Daniel smiled gently, proud and supportive, while Sandra regarded her with warm, determined eyes. After the conference, Vivian stepped away from the press room, feeling the exhaustion in her muscles but the resolve in her heart intact. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the city, and she realized that her words were meant not only to defend herself, but to inspire hope in those without a voice. Daniel and Sandra walked beside her as they reached the grand lobby, where a man in a police uniform waited. The light from the ceiling reflected off his shiny badge, catching Vivian's attention. Daniel glanced at the stranger warily, while Sandra tightened her grip on the documents in her hand. The officer approached slowly, his face a mixture of tension and determination. "Excuse me, Miss Sinclair," he said in a low, assured tone. "I am Officer Grant, and I have something important to tell you." Vivian looked at him in surprise, and for a moment silence fell over the group. Daniel took a deep breath, scrutinizing Grant's motives, while Sandra maintained a cautious stance. "We're listening, Officer Grant," Sandra said firmly. Grant swallowed hard as if gathering his courage, then began, "I have worked with Officer Walker for many years. I know exactly who he is and what he has done. I have witnessed him abuse his power, targeting those who cannot defend themselves. And I remain silent out of fear and pressure from above." A wave of emotion surged through Vivian. She understood that for an officer to stand up against a colleague was both rare and risky. "So what changed?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Grant's eyes filled with regret as he replied, "When I saw you stand up and face that abuse, I knew my silence was no longer acceptable. I could not keep turning a blind eye. What Walker did is not just wrong, it destroys the trust that people have in those who are meant to uphold justice." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes alight with hope. "You know this could put your career at risk, don't you?" he said softly. Grant nodded, a weary smile appearing on his face. "I know, but if I don't do this now, I'll never be able to look in the mirror without feeling ashamed. Justice is worth the price." Sandra smiled slightly, her eyes sharp with respect. "If you are willing to testify and provide an official statement, it will make a tremendous difference. We need every bit of support to bring this case to light." Taking a deep breath, Officer Grant looked directly into Vivian's eyes, his gaze resolute. "I'm ready," he said firmly. "I will provide any information you need and testify. I want everyone to know the truth about Walker and what he has done." As his words settled over the lobby, the atmosphere changed from one of tension to one of trust and solidarity. Vivian felt a surge of gratitude and said softly, "Thank you, Grant. You have no idea how much this means to me and so many others." Grant's eyes glowed with quiet warmth as he replied, "There is no need to thank me. This is something I must do." After Officer Grant departed to prepare for the next steps, Vivian turned to Daniel and Sandra. Their eyes reflected a mutual understanding, a silent acknowledgement that this battle had just gained an important ally. "We have just gained a major ally," Sandra said firmly. "Now we need to move quickly to turn this support into legal strength." Daniel placed his hand on Vivian's shoulder, smiling with pride. "We're making a difference, and you are at the heart of that change," he said. Vivian looked out the window as the streetlights began to glow under the twilight sky and felt a new strength rising within her, a conviction that justice was no longer an unattainable dream. With supporters like Grant, Daniel, and Sandra at her side, she knew that this fight had reached the stage where the truth would finally be revealed. Outside, a crowd had gathered, journalists, supporters, and onlookers drawn by the unfolding events. The hum of hundreds of voices formed a tense, suspenseful backdrop, and camera flashes illuminated each step as Vivian entered the building. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled with reporters broadcasting live and citizens who had followed the case through various media. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as all eyes were on the plaintiff's table, where Vivian and Sandra sat, with Daniel positioned just behind them. Soon, Officer Walker entered the courtroom. His face was cold and his eyes sharp as knives, but despite his attempt to maintain confidence, the tension in his gaze betrayed him. He took his seat at the defendant's table with his legal team, who exchanged nervous glances among themselves. Sandra rose and addressed the jury, her voice ringing out strongly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not just about one isolated incident. It reflects a much larger issue within our system. Vivian Sinclair is not the only victim. She represents countless others who have suffered abuse of power without a voice." Every word resonated as the jury, composed of people from all walks of life, listened intently to her powerful message. When Officer Grant was called to testify, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. He took the stand with confidence, despite the tension visible on his face, and after a brief glance at Walker, he focused on the jury. "I have worked with Officer Walker for many years," he began, "and I have witnessed his actions, his abuse of power that I could no longer ignore." As he recounted specific instances of Walker targeting vulnerable individuals and using excessive force, the tension in the room mounted, and every detail chipped away at Walker's carefully maintained facade. Vivian watched as Walker's attorney attempted to cast doubt on Grant's motives. "Officer Grant, you have worked with Walker for many years. Do you have a personal motive for testifying against him?" he asked, deliberately insinuating bias. Without flinching, Grant replied with admirable calm, "My motive is simple: justice. The truth I have kept silent about for far too long must now be spoken." Every word spoken by Officer Grant resonated deeply in the courtroom. Vivian felt her heart pound as hope glimmered in Daniel's eyes, and Sandra offered a subtle smile of encouragement. The trial lasted all day, filled with intense questioning and arguments. Walker's defense team tried repeatedly to justify his actions, but each attempt was skillfully countered by Sandra, who repeatedly steered the conversation back to the undeniable truth. Walker had abused his power and harmed an innocent person. At the close of the first day of the trial, Vivian stepped out of the courtroom. Although the sounds of the city continued to buzz outside, she felt a new strength rising within her. She had stood her ground against immense challenges and knew that tomorrow would bring new trials, but with the support of those around her, justice was no longer an impossible dream. The second day of the trial arrived with an air of heavy expectation. Vivian stood before the courthouse with a confidence that belied the nervousness still lingering in her heart. The murmurs of the crowd outside, the discussions among onlookers, and the hurried updates from reporters formed a tense backdrop as she once again entered the courtroom. Her eyes met Sandra's, who was finalizing the last set of documents, while Daniel's face bore a mix of determination and worry. Their silent encouragement reassured her that all their preparation, sacrifice, and courage would soon be put to the ultimate test. At the defendant's table, Walker sat with his legal team. Despite his attempts to project calm, the tension was evident in his clenched hands and furtive glances among his attorneys. Sandra rose once more and addressed the jury in a voice full of passion and authority. "Today, we are not merely judging one man," she declared, "but affirming that our society will not tolerate the abuse of power. When power is misused, it becomes a weapon of destruction, but when the truth is brought to light, justice will prevail." Her words seemed to awaken something in the room as the jurors exchanged determined looks. Walker's attorney attempted one final rebuttal, but their arguments lacked the strength needed to undermine the overwhelming evidence of abuse. After what seemed like an eternity of deliberation, the jury returned. The entire courtroom held its breath as the foreperson stepped forward with the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Bryce Walker, guilty on all counts." A wave of reaction rippled through the room, from thunderous applause to quiet murmurs of relief and emotion. Walker sat motionless, his face pale and his eyes wide with disbelief, while his legal team whispered among themselves, unable to accept the truth. In that moment, Vivian felt an immense weight lift from her shoulders, as if a boulder had been removed from her chest. She looked at Sandra, whose soft, satisfied smile said it all, while Daniel stood with pride and emotion. Outside the courthouse, supporters and reporters gathered. As Vivian stepped out, cheers and applause erupted like rolling waves. Cameras flashed incessantly, capturing a moment that would be remembered by the entire city. A young reporter approached with a trembling microphone and asked, "Miss Sinclair, is there anything you would like to say to everyone?" Vivian paused, took a deep breath, and then addressed the crowd with eyes shining with determination and gratitude. "Today we have proven that justice is not a privilege. It is a right for everyone. This is not merely my victory, but a victory for every person who has been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced. I hope that from now on, no one will ever have to fear speaking up.